Hello. Today General Hospital will reveal Willow has not been herself since the day that was supposed to mark a new beginning turned into a harrowing spectacle of humiliation. The wedding that should have been a celebration of love and resilience instead unraveled into public devastation, shattering what little emotional stability she had managed to maintain through months of illness, loss, and sacrifice. As she stood frozen in the middle of the aisle, watching Drew walk away. Or worse, realizing she had to walk away from him, something in her cracked. The break wasn't visible at first, but it was deep and irreversible. What began as quiet despair soon spiraled into a flood of confusion, regret, and internal chaos. The ghost of that moment clung to her like a second skin, infiltrating her thoughts, blurring the lines between past and present, between memory and reality. The loss wasn't just romantic, it was maternal, existential. Willow wasn't just mourning a man. She was mourning the crumbling of her identity as a mother. Her desperate struggle to hold on to Wiley and Amelia, the children she had once fought for with every fiber of her being, had become her sole purpose. When the courts took away her custody rights in May, it was more than a legal decision, it was a declaration that she no longer mattered in the lives she had nurtured. That ruling pushed her to the edge, but the failed wedding sent her spiraling off it. The woman who once radiated warmth and quiet strength had become unrecognizable even to herself. When she showed up at Carly's house days later, disheveled, trembling, insistent on seeing her children, her behavior stunned everyone. Her voice, once gentle and composed, now quivered with an unsettling urgency, and her eyes carried a haunting emptiness. It wasn't just sadness, it was disconnection, like a spirit detached from the body. Elizabeth, ever observant and compassionate, immediately recognized the signs of a psychological fracture. Without hesitation, she stepped in, guiding Willow away from the confrontation and back home with the hope that sleep and solitude might offer clarity. But the next morning, whatever calm Elizabeth had hoped for was merely a facade. Willow emerged not healed but hollowed. Her composure was artifice, her calm, a brittle shell. She smiled, but the smile was a crooked attempt to hide the tremors inside. When she approached Michael, begging him to let her see the children, it wasn't a mother advocating for her rights, it was a woman desperately clinging to the last remnants of her reality. The words she used were measured, but her eyes betrayed her, wild with longing, swimming in a storm of grief, confusion, and fear. Michael, though once deeply connected to her, saw the change. The woman standing before him was not the same one he had loved, protected, and shared a life with. This was someone unraveling, undone by the cumulative weight of trauma, her cancer, the transplant, Drew's betrayal, the legal battles, and above all, the erosion of her maternal bond. The ruling in May had stripped her of more than parental rights, it had stripped her of agency, dignity, and a future she had envisioned with the children who had given her strength during her darkest days. Now, behind her carefully applied makeup and clean clothes, her mind screamed in silence. And slowly, Willow began to disappear. The truth, the one that no one dared to speak aloud, was that Willow had started hearing voices. At first, it was merely whispers, soft echoes of Wiley's name drifting through her mind during sleepless nights. But the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They became directives, urging her to act, to protect, to reclaim what was hers. She began writing letters to Amelia, dozens of them, even though the child was far too young to read. She stored them inside an old music box once owned by Harmony, the only person who had ever truly understood the madness that grief could breed. The act, though seemingly tender, was deeply troubling, an obsessive compulsion masquerading as maternal devotion. And then came the hallucinations. She started imagining conversations with Nina, the mother she once rejected, then briefly accepted, and now saw as the embodiment of everything she could not control. These phantom conversations vacillated between rage and tears, blame and longing. It was as if Willow needed an enemy to stay anchored in her emotional narrative, a dark presence to define herself against as she struggled to hold on to her fractured identity. But in doing so, she had become unmoored. The boundaries between what was real and what was imagined collapsed in her mind, and the more she tried to hold them in place, the more they slipped through her fingers. When Caitlin McMullen appeared in a live interview to reflect on Willow's arc, fans were both intrigued and unnerved by her candor. She didn't shy away from the possibility that Willow might descend into complete madness. In fact, she welcomed it. She spoke not with trepidation, but with a haunting mixture of anticipation and empathy. To her, the descent into psychological collapse was not the end of Willow's story but a necessary reckoning, a climax to a narrative long saturated with repression, sacrifice, and pain. McMullen admitted that she often fantasized about where the storyline could go, and the notion of Willow losing herself entirely seemed like the most authentic culmination to everything the character had endured. It wasn't just about acting. It was about surrendering fully to the dark tide that had always lurked beneath the surface of Willow's grace. There was something chilling about her conviction, as though she too had lived within Willow's unraveling psyche for so long that she could no longer differentiate her own creative longing from the character's torment. She spoke of going all the way with the storyline, of allowing the darkness to bloom completely, of letting Willow snap. It was a rare admission from an actor so deeply intertwined with their role, and it sent ripples of anxiety and excitement through the fandom. Could General Hospital truly go that far? Could they depict a woman once held up as the emotional core of the show deteriorating into a version of herself so far gone that even her loved ones no longer recognized her? In the days ahead, Port Charles would be forced to confront the implications of Willow's mental decline. Some would advocate for compassion, for psychiatric intervention, for healing. Others would see her as a threat, especially if the voices in her head continued to urge her toward drastic measures. And through it all, Willow herself would be left wandering the ruins of her own mind, searching for a child's laughter, a lover's promise, or a mother's embrace, none of which may ever return. What remains to be seen is whether this descent is the end of Willow's story, or the beginning of a rebirth so raw and painful that it strips her down completely, leaving only truth behind. One thing is certain, the woman who once stood so still, so serene at the altar, is gone. And whatever rises from her ashes may be unrecognizable, unpredictable, and unforgettable. In the eyes of acting coach Holly Gagnier, Willow's unraveling is not simply a breakdown, it is the fragile beginning of a potential resurrection. Where others see irreversible damage and descent, Gagnier sees the raw materials of one of the most profound character arcs General Hospital could ever explore, a slow, painful, emotional reclamation of identity. To her, the sheer weight of Willow's collapse could become the very foundation of her rebirth. If the show were to lean into this darkness with care and authenticity, it could chart a powerful course through mental illness, grief, and healing, offering a storyline that resonates far beyond the confines of daytime drama. This would not be a sensationalist fall from grace, but a careful, character-driven examination of how trauma distorts reality, isolates the mind, and, if acknowledged, can be slowly repaired, layer by layer. Gagnier's view is rooted not in hope alone but in experience. As an acting mentor, she's seen performers carry characters through the depths of grief and despair, only to emerge with a truth so emotionally honest that it redefines how audiences see them. For Willow, such a transformation would not be tidy or linear. It would be chaotic, heartbreaking, and slow. It would require scenes of quiet introspection, moments of terrifying clarity, and painful confrontations with the people who either failed her, left her, or loved her too much to walk away. But while Gagnier holds on to that possibility with quiet conviction, what's playing out on screen hints at a future far bleaker. Willow is not showing signs of healing. Quite the opposite, she's sinking silently beneath the surface, lost in her own mind. The tragedy lies in the subtlety of her deterioration. She doesn't erupt into violence. She doesn't cry for help. Instead, she fades. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the Willow her loved ones knew vanishes behind glassy eyes and soft murmurs to no one. Her collapse is so eerily quiet that it takes a trained eye to see the signs, the momentary confusion when asked a simple question, the soft chuckle when no one has spoken, the distant stare into corners of the room where nothing stands except echoes of a life she once had. There are reports that she has begun speaking to Drew as though he were still in the house, still by her side. She sets an extra place at the table for him. Once, she even mentioned that he had taken Wiley to school, completely unaware that Drew had not only left her at the altar but severed ties with her entirely. Even more disturbing is her nocturnal routine. Almost nightly, Willow drifts into Amelia's room, sometimes singing lullabies to an empty crib, sometimes cradling a blanket and whispering apologies to it as though it were her baby. When Elizabeth found her one night in that state, she froze, not from shock, but from fear. The kind of fear that tightens your chest when you realize someone you care for is slipping so far away that even reaching out might shatter what's left of them. That incident marked a turning point. Elizabeth contacted a psychiatrist for a home consultation, hoping for a gentle intervention. But Willow refused to speak with them. In her words, she wasn't ill, she was grieving. She wasn't delusional, she was misunderstood. She claimed that everyone around her was determined to rob her of her children once again, to silence her truth under the guise of concern. To her, this wasn't compassion, it was control. She began to believe that every visit, every gesture of support, was part of a coordinated effort to erase her role as a mother and push her further into isolation. This paranoia grew, infecting her thoughts and her interactions. She started locking doors behind her, keeping the curtains closed at all times, and disabling the cameras Carly had installed for security. She whispered to Wiley's old stuffed animals, telling them not to trust anyone, not even Michael. Her letters to Amelia, once gentle and mournful, took on an urgent, panicked tone, pleading with the child to remember her, to resist being manipulated by those who wanted her gone. The psychological implications are staggering. Mental health professionals consulted by the family have raised the alarm that Willow may be experiencing early symptoms of a chronic psychotic disorder, potentially schizoaffective in nature, brought on or exacerbated by long-term trauma, stress, and the neurocognitive side effects of her cancer treatments. There are discussions behind closed doors about the need for long-term inpatient care, but no one dares say it to her face. The guilt is too great. The love too tangled. And the fear of breaking her completely, too paralyzing. And then there is Nina. For so long, Nina and Willow were locked in a brutal, contentious dance of rejection and accusation. But as she watches her daughter crumble from a distance, the anger has dissolved. All that remains is regret. Regret for not trying harder, for not understanding sooner, for allowing pride to get in the way of what now seems so painfully simple, love. Unspoken. Unconditional. Nina, no longer willing to rely on intuition alone, took a bold and controversial step. She quietly hired a private psychiatrist, not to intervene, but to observe. She wanted to confirm what her heart already feared, that Willow was in danger, not from anyone else, but from herself. The doctor's reports, while carefully worded, confirmed her suspicions. Willow's grip on reality was weakening. She was emotionally fragile, prone to delusional thinking, and increasingly isolated. And if something didn't change soon, she could become permanently unreachable. Desperate, Nina approached Michael. Her tone was soft, her eyes sincere. She didn't come with accusations or demands, only a plea. Let her help. Not for herself. Not for recognition. But for the woman they both loved, in different ways. Michael listened, arms folded, jaw tense. He couldn't forget the things Nina had done. He couldn't erase the damage. But as a father, he recognized the look in her eyes. The raw, terrified urgency of a parent watching their child slip through their fingers. Still, trust is hard-won, and Michael hesitated. Willow had made it clear she didn't want Nina involved in her life. And if her current delusions deepened with Nina's presence, it could trigger something catastrophic. But in the quiet corners of his own heart, Michael began to feel the first tremors of fear, the kind that keeps you up at night, wondering if you waited too long to act. And so now, those who love Willow are caught in limbo. Every path forward feels like a risk. Force her into treatment, and she may break. Leave her be, and she may vanish entirely into the alternate world she's begun to construct. One where Drew still loves her. Where Wiley and Amelia run to her arms. Where harmony watches over them all with approval and peace. A world where pain doesn't exist, and where healing, ironically, can never begin because the wounds are never acknowledged. This is the quiet tragedy of Willow's descent. It's not loud or explosive, but suffocating and slow. A kind of emotional erosion that leaves behind only the shell of a woman who once stood for compassion, sacrifice, and strength. The hope that she will find her way back still flickers in the hearts of those who care for her. But with each day that passes, that hope dims, overtaken by the cold realization that they may soon be mourning a woman who hasn't physically died, but who, for all intents and purposes, may already be gone. In an upcoming, as yet unaired development whispered quietly among crew and insiders behind the scenes, a pivotal moment is being crafted that may alter the trajectory of Willow's entire storyline, and possibly the emotional core of General Hospital itself. Sources close to production suggest that Willow is on the cusp of a seismic breakthrough. One that will either tip her into full psychological collapse or, astonishingly, mark the beginning of a raw and painful healing journey. This critical fork in the road won't be subtle. It will be catalyzed by an emotionally charged event that forces Willow to confront the very edges of her mental instability, and at the heart of it all may be the person she's fought hardest for, Wiley. Wiley, the child who has served as the emotional anchor of Willow's life, could unwittingly become the trigger for her final descent. There are whispers that in a rapidly approaching episode, Willow, caught in a delusional state brought on by the accumulation of trauma, isolation, and her unraveling sense of self, may attempt to rescue Wiley from a perceived threat. But the danger won't be real, it will exist only within the fractured chambers of her mind. She may come to believe that someone close, perhaps Michael or even Nina, is conspiring to harm him or erase her from his life entirely. In this distorted mindset, what she sees as maternal instinct could in fact lead her to cross a dangerous line, abducting Wiley in a desperate, misguided attempt to protect him. This potential act would not stem from cruelty or malice, but from a shattered psyche crying out to reclaim the only sense of purpose she believes she has left. It would be a culmination of everything that has haunted her, the stolen wedding, the revoked custody, the silent nights alone with hallucinations, and the gnawing belief that the world is conspiring to erase her motherhood, her identity, her existence. For Willow, stealing Wiley wouldn't feel like a crime, it would feel like salvation. But for those around her, it would be the confirmation of every fear they've tried to avoid confronting. That she is no longer safe. Not for herself, and not for the ones she loves. Alternatively, the writers may opt for a more meditative, slower-burning path, no less devastating but framed with restrained psychological depth. In this direction, rather than a dramatic public implosion, Willow may find herself quietly and involuntarily committed to a psychiatric facility. There, surrounded by sterile white walls and antiseptic silence, she would be stripped of the roles she's clung to, mother, wife, survivor. And forced to sit alone with nothing but the fragments of her own mind. No visitors. No distractions. No more avoidance. The only voices would be those inside her head, echoing memories, regrets, and questions that have long gone unanswered. These echoing chambers of the mind could become the setting for some of the most emotionally raw material General Hospital has ever explored, an introspective reckoning where Willow must relive her trauma from the inside out. The loss of her baby. Her cancer diagnosis. Her complicated relationship with Nina. The betrayal by Drew. The disintegration of her relationship with Michael. Each moment would be examined like a shard of broken glass, sharp, painful, necessary. Only then, in that barren environment, when stripped of pretense and delusion, might Willow be able to begin the long process of stitching herself back together. Either path, whether immediate collapse or slow disassembly, leads to one inescapable truth. Willow has entered the point of no return. The days of surface-level sorrow and socially acceptable sadness are over. She is no longer the quiet warrior who withstood her pain for the sake of others. She is now the embodiment of it, her internal chaos made manifest. The audience, long accustomed to seeing Willow as the show's moral and emotional compass, must now reconcile with the terrifying possibility that the same love which once made her so strong has become the very force that is destroying her. And at the center of this storm is actress Caitlin McMullen, who is preparing to deliver what insiders describe as a performance that could redefine her entire legacy on the show. Those who have witnessed scenes currently in production say her work is nothing short of devastating. She portrays Willow not as a caricature of madness, but as a woman fighting tooth and nail against an invisible enemy inside her head, a woman aware that she's slipping but too broken to stop the fall. It's a haunting portrait of mental illness painted with such precision and empathy that viewers will be left breathless. When a character like Willow, once the symbol of nurturing, resilience, and maternal grace, becomes a potential threat to the very children she loves, the stakes shift entirely. This isn't just a personal tragedy anymore, it's a collective reckoning for everyone around her. Carly, Michael, Elizabeth, Nina, each will be forced to confront their own roles in her undoing.